Alex had always believed that success was measured by how loudly the world acknowledged it. Every milestone, every achievement, every promotion he had ever chased was tied to a simple, unspoken idea: recognition. In his mind, if people didn't notice what he did, if they didn't praise him, if they didn't admire him, then it didn't really matter. He had grown up seeing examples of celebrated individuals, those who were applauded and praised, and he had absorbed the belief that being seen was synonymous with being successful. From an early age, he had worked tirelessly to stand out, to excel, to outshine, to be recognized. He remembered the countless late nights during college, poring over assignments not because he loved the work, but because he wanted to be top of the class. He remembered the hours spent practicing speeches, polishing presentations, making sure every word, every gesture, every detail would make people notice him. The validation felt sweet and addictive. Every compliment fueled his motivation, every acknowledgement made him feel alive, and every instance of being overlooked felt like a personal failure. The pattern had continued seamlessly into his professional life. At work, Alex meticulously built a reputation for excellence. He took on challenging projects, always volunteering for tasks others avoided, ensuring his contributions were visible. He made a habit of sharing updates with his superiors, posting his achievements on internal networks, and subtly making sure colleagues noticed his effort. He was careful, strategic, and relentless. For years, this approach had worked. He had received awards, promotions, and recognition. He had amassed a network of people who admired him, colleagues who envied him, and leaders who appreciated his work. To the outside world, he was the embodiment of success. But that day, everything felt different. He had spent weeks preparing for a high-stakes presentation that could have defined the next stage of his career. He had rehearsed tirelessly, crafted every slide with precision, and practiced delivering each word perfectly. In his mind, this was the moment where all eyes would be on him, where admiration would flow freely, where applause would fill the room. He entered the conference hall with confidence, carried himself with poise, and delivered his presentation with passion. When he finished, he waited. He waited for the nods, the smiles, the claps that would validate all his effort. But there was nothing. A polite murmur of agreement, a few nods, some polite expressions of acknowledgement, but no excitement, no applause, no visible signs of admiration. The room continued with the next agenda item, and Alex sat down, a strange emptiness settling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt invisible. The recognition he had worked so hard for was absent, and he was left confronting a truth he had long ignored: being seen by others didn't always come, no matter how hard he tried. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at his phone, scrolling through notifications he had long associated with approval. Nothing felt meaningful. Messages of congratulations from colleagues felt hollow, as if the sincerity he craved was missing. The realization hit him hard: he had been measuring his worth through the eyes of others, and that measure was fragile, fleeting, and unreliable. Every success he had chased had been tied to validation from an external source, and now he was beginning to question whether all his effort had been in vain. Alex began to reflect on his life, on the choices he had made, and on the motivations behind them. He remembered the countless nights he had sacrificed sleep to complete tasks that no one noticed, the relationships he had neglected in pursuit of recognition, the stress and anxiety that had accompanied every step of ambition. He realized that his pursuit of being seen had come at the cost of inner peace. He had been constantly hungry for approval, constantly anxious about perception, constantly striving to impress. In the silence of his apartment, he confronted a question he had never asked himself before: am I chasing success for the world or for myself? The question lingered in his mind, persistent and uncomfortable. Alex had never considered that success could exist independently of applause, recognition, or validation. The thought seemed almost foreign, yet strangely liberating. He wondered whether it was possible to achieve something meaningful without needing everyone to know about it, whether satisfaction could come from the work itself rather than the acknowledgement it received. The idea was unsettling, challenging the very foundation of the way he had lived his life, yet there was a spark of curiosity that he could not ignore. Over the next few days, Alex found himself thinking about the nature of recognition and achievement. He observed his colleagues, noting how some people worked quietly, consistently, and effectively, yet rarely drew attention to themselves. These individuals seemed calm, focused, and satisfied, unaffected by whether anyone praised them or not. Their work spoke for itself, and the impact they created was tangible, even if it went unnoticed. Alex realized that there was a profound difference between being recognized and being effective, between seeking applause and creating value. He began to understand that the emptiness he felt after the presentation was not a reflection of failure but a reflection of misplaced priorities. Alex decided to take a step back from the constant need for validation. He committed, quietly, to approaching his work differently, not for recognition, not for admiration, but simply to do his best. The first few days felt strange. Without the constant feedback loop of approval, he felt unmoored, uncertain, and exposed. He had spent so long measuring success through the eyes of others that doing something purely for its own sake seemed unnatural. Yet, gradually, he began to feel a subtle shift. There was a sense of freedom in working without expectation, a quiet joy in effort itself, and a newfound clarity in focusing on what truly mattered. By the end of that week, Alex had started to notice something remarkable. His focus had sharpened, his creativity had returned, and his work felt more meaningful. He was no longer chasing applause, no longer distracted by how others might perceive him. For the first time, he experienced a form of satisfaction that was not dependent on recognition. It was quiet, internal, and resilient, a feeling that no external praise could ever replicate. He realized that success, in its truest sense, might not always be loud or celebrated, but it could be profound, lasting, and deeply fulfilling when pursued with intention and humility. Alex's journey had just begun. That moment of silence after his presentation had awakened something within him, a curiosity to discover the power of quiet success. He knew it would not be easy to abandon the habits and beliefs that had defined him for years, but he felt a spark of hope that there could be a different path, one where achievement and fulfillment were measured not by applause, but by the satisfaction of meaningful work and the strength of character cultivated along the way. The emptiness he had felt was no longer a source of despair, it was a catalyst for transformation, a beginning of a journey toward embracing humility and finding the art of silent success. After that moment of quiet reflection, Alex decided to test a new approach. He wanted to see what it would feel like to work without seeking recognition, without expecting validation from anyone, and without worrying about how others perceived him. At first, it was uncomfortable. He felt exposed, almost vulnerable, as if removing the shield of constant recognition left him unprotected. Yet, beneath that discomfort, there was a subtle curiosity, a desire to see if he could find satisfaction from effort alone, from doing work that mattered regardless of applause. He began by taking on a small project that had been lingering on his desk for months. It was not glamorous or high-profile, it was a tedious task that required focus, precision, and consistency. Normally, Alex would have rushed to share progress updates, highlight his achievements, and ensure that everyone knew how hard he was working. This time, he didn't. He approached it quietly, concentrating fully on the task itself. He noticed things he had never noticed before, the patterns in the data, the subtle ways small changes could improve outcomes, the satisfaction of solving problems efficiently. The work itself became rewarding, independent of anyone's approval. As days turned into weeks, Alex started to notice a strange transformation within himself. The constant tension he had carried, the anxious need to be admired, began to dissipate. He no longer measured the value of his work by how many emails he received praising it or how many people commented on his achievements. Instead, he measured it by the quality of his effort and the tangible results it produced. The realization was liberating. He felt lighter, freer, and more focused than he had in years. His mind was no longer cluttered with worries about perception, and his energy, once drained by the pursuit of approval, was now directed entirely toward meaningful action. Despite his progress, the world around him did not immediately change. Colleagues continued to operate in the same old ways, vying for attention, seeking recognition, and celebrating visible achievements. Some of them noticed Alex working quietly, and some even whispered about his seeming withdrawal from self-promotion. A few colleagues wondered why he wasn't sharing updates, why he wasn't highlighting his contributions, and why he appeared less concerned with being noticed. For a moment, Alex felt a flicker of doubt. Was he making a mistake? Was he ignoring the unwritten rules of success by refusing to advertise his accomplishments? One afternoon, he shared his doubts with Mr. Thompson, his mentor, who had always offered guidance in subtle, profound ways. Alex admitted that he was struggling with the pressure to be seen, that the habits of seeking validation were deeply ingrained, and that he wasn't sure if silent work would ever be noticed or valued. Mr. Thompson listened patiently, nodding. Then he said, "Alex, most people mistake visibility for impact. They think being recognized is the same as being effective. You are discovering something far rarer. The ability to create value without attachment to praise. That is a skill few possess, and it is more powerful than the loudest applause." Alex pondered these words. He realized that throughout his life, he had equated success with visibility, forgetting that meaningful work often goes unnoticed, at least initially. He thought of countless people he had admired in the past, leaders, innovators, creators, whose most important contributions were not immediately celebrated. Their impact was deep, sometimes invisible to the casual observer, yet it shaped outcomes, changed lives, and left lasting marks. The lesson became clearer: true achievement did not require a spotlight, it required focus, integrity, and dedication. Motivated by this insight, Alex began to extend his quiet approach beyond the small project. He sought opportunities where he could make a difference without drawing attention to himself. He helped colleagues without expecting thanks, shared knowledge without seeking credit, and solved problems without announcing his efforts. The more he practiced this, the more he discovered that his work felt inherently rewarding. There was a sense of calm satisfaction in knowing that he had contributed meaningfully, regardless of whether anyone noticed. For the first time, Alex felt a type of success that was internal, resilient, and enduring. Despite the internal growth, challenges arose. Old habits, deeply ingrained over years of chasing recognition, would occasionally resurface. There were moments when Alex felt the urge to boast, to ensure someone noticed his efforts, to seek validation for the work he had poured himself into. He caught himself drafting emails, updating colleagues, or subtly mentioning his contributions, only to pause and reconsider. Each time, he reminded himself that the goal was different now. The focus was no longer on external recognition but on the intrinsic value of effort and results. Over time, these moments of temptation became less frequent, and the habit of quiet, focused work grew stronger. Alex also began to notice changes in the way others interacted with him. Some colleagues, who had previously seen him as a competitor in the race for attention, began to respect his consistency and integrity. They noticed that his work, though understated, was reliable, precise, and impactful. Slowly, he became a quiet force in the organization, a person whose presence and contribution were deeply valued, even if not loudly celebrated. Alex realized that true influence did not always come from visibility. Sometimes, it came from steady competence, reliability, and the quiet confidence of someone who did not need approval to validate their effort. As weeks passed, Alex reflected on the difference between the old and new ways of approaching success. He realized that the pursuit of recognition had been exhausting, anxiety-inducing, and often hollow. The pursuit of value, integrity, and quiet excellence, on the other hand, was energizing, fulfilling, and sustainable. He understood that the world might still be noisy, competitive, and fixated on appearances, but he no longer needed to participate in that noise. He had discovered a way to thrive in silence, to succeed without spectacle, and to find satisfaction in work itself rather than in applause. Alex's internal transformation was profound. He began to feel a sense of mastery not just over his tasks, but over his own mind, priorities, and desires. The fear of being overlooked, once so intense, had diminished. He had replaced it with a quiet confidence that came from knowing he was creating real value, that his work mattered, and that fulfillment did not depend on recognition. He realized that humility was not weakness, it was strength. It allowed him to focus, to learn, to grow, and to create impact without being distracted by superficial rewards. By the end of this phase, Alex had begun to embrace the idea that success could be silent and still be powerful. He had started to internalize the truth that recognition might come eventually, or it might not, but the real reward was the growth, mastery, and satisfaction that came from doing meaningful work. He felt a deep sense of liberation, a freedom that he had never experienced before. The shift was subtle, quiet, but profound. It was the beginning of a journey toward true success, one measured not by applause, but by impact, integrity, and inner fulfillment. Alex's quiet journey began to take shape in ways he hadn't anticipated. After weeks of focusing on work purely for its own sake, he noticed a shift not only in the quality of his output but also in his own mindset. The tension, the constant need to be noticed, the gnawing anxiety of whether people were impressed, all of it began to fade. Instead, a calm clarity emerged. Alex started tackling projects he had long postponed, not for recognition, not for applause, but because they were meaningful and important. The difference was subtle at first, but it became increasingly evident as days passed. One project in particular demanded his full attention, a complex initiative that had the potential to improve the company's efficiency dramatically but had been stalled for months due to lack of attention. Colleagues considered it a thankless project because it was behind the scenes and would rarely be noticed by higher management. For Alex, however, the challenge was invigorating. He approached it methodically, analyzing every detail, identifying inefficiencies, and proposing improvements that no one had considered. He didn't announce his work, he didn't update his team repeatedly, and he certainly didn't post anything online. He simply immersed himself fully in the problem, seeking solutions purely for the satisfaction of solving them. As he worked quietly, Alex discovered something profound. When the drive to be recognized was removed, he could think more clearly, act more creatively, and focus more deeply. The distractions of ego and comparison no longer dominated his mind. Ideas flowed more freely, decisions became more deliberate, and the quality of his work improved in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Each small success felt rewarding, not because anyone noticed, but because he could see tangible progress and meaningful results. For the first time, Alex understood that fulfillment could come from mastery, diligence, and contribution rather than external validation. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Old habits and insecurities sometimes resurfaced. Occasionally, Alex would catch himself thinking, if someone noticed this, it would prove my worth, only to stop and remind himself that the validation he truly needed came from within. Each time he resisted the temptation to seek approval, his confidence in silent work strengthened. Over time, this became a habit, an instinctive approach to his work and life. The act of quiet diligence began to define him more than any public recognition ever had. Colleagues started noticing changes in Alex's approach, but not in the way he had once expected. There were no dramatic announcements or public displays of achievement. Instead, people began to observe that his work, although understated, had a profound impact. Processes were smoother, problems were solved before they escalated, and projects that once seemed impossible now succeeded effortlessly. Without broadcasting his efforts, Alex had become indispensable. He realized that influence did not require applause. Silent contribution, steady competence, and consistent excellence spoke louder than any announcement ever could. This period also brought internal growth beyond the workplace. Alex noticed a subtle shift in his interactions with others. He listened more attentively, offered guidance without expectation of praise, and helped colleagues quietly without seeking acknowledgement. The relationships he cultivated felt genuine, rooted in trust and mutual respect rather than competition or performance. He discovered the joy of giving freely, contributing meaningfully, and lifting others without the need for recognition. This generosity of effort became a natural extension of his new approach, further reinforcing his internal satisfaction and sense of purpose. Alex also began reflecting on his past struggles and achievements. He realized that much of the stress, frustration, and dissatisfaction he had experienced stemmed from the constant need to be seen and praised. He had believed that visibility equaled success, that applause equaled worth, and that admiration equaled fulfillment. That mindset had driven him to overwork, worry incessantly, and compare himself endlessly to others. Now, he saw that the absence of recognition could be liberating, that working quietly and purposefully could yield results far more meaningful than public accolades. As the project progressed, Alex noticed another important lesson emerging. The most profound impact of his quiet work was not immediate recognition but lasting value. Systems improved, processes became more efficient, and colleagues who relied on his contributions felt the benefit without even realizing the full extent of his effort. Time passed, and the quiet dedication Alex had cultivated began to bear fruit in ways he had never anticipated. The project he had been nurturing, once overlooked and underestimated, had grown into something vital for the company's operations. Efficiency had improved, mistakes had decreased, and the workflows he had redesigned were now the backbone of several key departments. Colleagues began to notice, but not because Alex sought recognition. It was the impact of his work that spoke for itself, undeniable and measurable. Even those who had previously doubted him began to respect the consistency and skill with which he operated. Management, who had been unaware of the behind-the-scenes transformation, started to take note. Reports of improved outcomes, faster project completions, and reduced errors began circulating, and Alex's name appeared more often in discussions. Not because he promoted himself, but because his results could not be ignored. Unlike the recognition he had previously chased, this acknowledgement was grounded in actual value rather than presentation or self-promotion. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride or arrogance, because the validation was secondary to the work itself. Even as recognition began to arrive, Alex's mindset had changed so profoundly that he no longer measured his worth by it. He understood now that being noticed was never the goal, creating impact was. The difference was liberating. He could accept praise graciously without letting it define him, and he could continue working diligently even when no one noticed. This shift gave him a new sense of freedom, as he was no longer trapped in the exhausting cycle of seeking attention, performing for approval, or comparing himself to others. The results of his labor had become a reflection of his skill, patience, and integrity, not his need to be admired. As word of Alex's work spread, his influence in the company grew quietly but powerfully. Colleagues who once competed for visibility now sought his guidance and advice, realizing that his approach produced tangible results. They began asking for his input on projects, trusting his judgment, and respecting his expertise. Alex noticed that the respect he received was different from what he had experienced before. It was genuine, earned through consistent effort, and untainted by ego or self-promotion. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment in mentoring others and sharing knowledge without expecting anything in return, understanding that the true value of contribution was in its impact rather than acknowledgement. At the same time, Alex began to reflect on the lessons he had learned from his journey. The silence, once uncomfortable and unnerving, had become a space of growth and clarity. By stepping away from the constant need for recognition, he had discovered strengths and capabilities he had never fully appreciated. He had become more patient, more disciplined, and more creative. His ability to solve complex problems, innovate quietly, and remain focused had grown exponentially. He realized that the pursuit of silent success required resilience, self-awareness, and humility. Qualities that were far more valuable than any temporary applause. Alex also noticed how his relationships changed. By removing the pressure to perform for attention, he connected more genuinely with his colleagues. Conversations became more meaningful, collaborations more effective, and trust more abundant. People were drawn to him not because he demanded admiration, but because he demonstrated competence, reliability, and integrity. Alex understood that quiet success was contagious. When others observed the value of dedicated, humble effort, they too were inspired to prioritize substance over show. His influence extended beyond tangible results, shaping the culture of those around him. Despite these positive changes, Alex remained grounded. He understood that recognition, when it arrived, was not the goal, and he treated it as a natural consequence of consistent effort rather than a measure of self-worth. He had learned to separate his identity from external validation, realizing that the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work was far more enduring than fleeting applause. Even when accolades came, they served only as confirmation of impact, never as a substitute for intrinsic fulfillment. This perspective allowed him to remain focused, resilient, and humble, maintaining the principles that had guided his transformation. Alex's mentor, Mr. Thompson, noticed the shift in him with quiet pride. He observed how Alex had moved from a person obsessed with recognition to someone who measured success by impact, integrity, and growth. In one conversation, Mr. Thompson remarked, "You have discovered the rarest form of success, Alex. The kind that doesn't need an audience, the kind that builds quietly, and the kind that lasts long after applause fades." Alex nodded, understanding the depth of those words. The journey had been challenging, requiring patience, self-discipline, and a willingness to confront ingrained habits, but the outcome had been transformative. As the months progressed, Alex began to notice the subtle rewards of his approach in ways he had never expected. While he had not sought fame, he began receiving invitations to lead initiatives, share his insights, and contribute to critical projects. Colleagues sought his advice, and leadership consulted him for strategy decisions. These recognitions were not the validation he had once craved but were natural outcomes of the consistent, high-quality work he had done quietly over time. Alex realized that when success is built on genuine effort and meaningful contribution, recognition follows organically rather than being forced or demanded. Through this process, Alex also discovered the internal freedom that comes with humility. He no longer measured his worth against the achievements of others or the opinions of those around him. Instead, he focused on the work itself, on improving, on learning, and on helping others succeed. This mindset brought a profound peace, a clarity that allowed him to make better decisions, act with purpose, and maintain resilience in the face of challenges. The quiet path he had chosen had not only enhanced his professional abilities but had reshaped his entire approach to life. By the end of this stage, Alex had fully embraced the philosophy of silent success. He had transformed from someone who chased applause and recognition into someone who valued contribution, integrity, and consistent effort above all else. He had discovered that true fulfillment comes not from being seen but from knowing that one's work has meaning, that one's effort makes a difference, and that personal growth is measured internally rather than externally. In this quiet, humble approach, Alex had found a form of success far more powerful, enduring, and satisfying than any he had pursued before. Alex's journey during this period demonstrated that recognition, when it comes naturally, is far more meaningful than recognition that is forced or sought. It reinforced the truth that the most powerful successes are those built quietly, persistently, and with integrity. By embracing humility, focusing on value, and working without attachment to praise, Alex had unlocked a level of personal and professional fulfillment that he had never experienced when chasing applause. The journey had not been easy, but the lessons learned and the transformation achieved were profound and lasting. Alex had reached a point in his journey where recognition and success had begun to arrive naturally, yet he no longer needed them to feel validated. The transformation that had begun months earlier had become ingrained, shaping not only how he worked but also how he perceived life itself. He had learned that true success was not a performance for others, not a series of accolades to collect, but a quiet mastery of effort, consistency, and integrity. Each day became an opportunity to contribute meaningfully, improve, and grow, free from the burden of seeking external approval. He reflected on how far he had come. In the past, his life had revolved around appearances. Every action was calculated to impress someone, every success measured by how loudly it was acknowledged. That mindset had brought temporary rewards but left him exhausted, anxious, and unsatisfied. Now, Alex understood that the satisfaction he had long sought was never found in the applause of others but in the deliberate application of skill, the quiet solving of problems, and the subtle but meaningful impact of his work. He had discovered that inner fulfillment could exist independently of recognition, and that realization brought an unparalleled peace. Alex's approach had begun to influence those around him in profound ways. Colleagues who once competed for attention began to notice the value of quiet persistence and humility. They observed that Alex's methods produced results that were tangible, lasting, and deeply impactful. Some sought his guidance, not because he boasted or demanded respect, but because his consistent, humble efforts had earned it. Alex realized that influence built quietly, rooted in integrity and competence, was far more enduring than influence built on self-promotion or noise. This lesson extended beyond his professional life. He saw its relevance in personal relationships, community engagement, and even how he approached challenges in his own growth. The sense of fulfillment Alex experienced now was internal and resilient. Unlike the fleeting pleasure of external validation, it was steady, enduring, and self-sustaining. He no longer measured success by comparisons with others or by the reactions of peers. Instead, he measured it by the value he created, the problems he solved, and the positive impact his efforts had on the people and systems around him. Each completed task, each improvement implemented, and each solution crafted brought satisfaction not because someone praised it, but but because he could see its intrinsic worth. Alex also noticed the subtler, quieter rewards of humility. Relationships deepened as he treated colleagues and friends without expectation. He listened more than he spoke, supported without seeking credit, and acted with patience and understanding. People responded not to his words of self-promotion but to his consistent demonstration of capability, trustworthiness, and care. Alex realized that these were the forms of recognition that mattered most: respect earned through authenticity, trust built through action, and influence cultivated through integrity. These rewards, though quiet, were far more meaningful than applause or accolades. Even when formal recognition arrived, awards, promotions, or praise from leadership, Alex treated it as a natural consequence of his work rather than the goal. He received acknowledgement with gratitude but without attachment, understanding that the true measure of success was not the applause but the effect of his contributions. The difference in his response surprised some colleagues who remembered the old Alex, who would have sought validation, boasted of accomplishments, and measured self-worth by others' opinions. The new Alex had mastered a profound lesson. Humility and quiet effort amplified both effectiveness and fulfillment. Through this journey, Alex also developed a deeper understanding of personal growth. He had learned to confront his own insecurities, to resist the urge for approval, and to cultivate patience, discipline, and focus. Each challenge he faced, each moment of temptation to revert to old habits, became an opportunity to strengthen his inner resolve. He realized that the path to quiet success was not passive. It required conscious effort, self-awareness, and perseverance. The journey had refined him not only as a professional but as a human being, instilling values that would guide him in all aspects of life. Alex began sharing these insights with those willing to listen. He encouraged younger colleagues to value substance over show, to pursue work that mattered rather than recognition that was fleeting. He shared the importance of patience, diligence, and integrity, emphasizing that true success was cultivated quietly, steadily, and deliberately. Many who adopted even a fraction of this approach noticed changes in their own lives: less stress, more focus, and deeper satisfaction from meaningful contribution. Alex saw the ripple effect of his transformation, understanding that quiet success could inspire and influence others more powerfully than public display ever could. As his career progressed, Alex maintained the principles that had transformed him. He continued to take on challenging projects, solve complex problems, and contribute to the growth of his organization, always quietly, always with purpose. Recognition continued to come, but he no longer needed it to validate himself. Instead, he celebrated internal victories: problems solved efficiently, systems improved, people helped, and knowledge shared. These achievements became the foundation of his confidence, resilience, and satisfaction. The internal metrics of success he had cultivated now guided every decision, every action, and every goal. Alex also discovered that this philosophy extended beyond work. In his personal life, he applied the same principles: relationships built on trust rather than approval, actions motivated by care rather than acknowledgement, and personal growth pursued for fulfillment rather than admiration. The consistency between his professional and personal life created a sense of alignment, purpose, and inner peace he had never experienced before. By embracing humility and silent success, he had not only transformed his career but had reshaped his entire approach to life. By the end of this journey, Alex had internalized a simple but profound truth: success that is loud and showy may attract attention, but success that is quiet, consistent, and impactful endures. Recognition is fleeting. Fulfillment is lasting. Humility is strength, self-promotion is temporary. He had learned that real achievement is measured not by how the world applauds but by the difference one makes, the integrity one maintains, and the satisfaction one derives from knowing that one's work is meaningful. The lessons of this journey would guide him forever, shaping both his actions and his character. Alex had transformed completely. He was no longer defined by the desire to be seen, praised, or admired. He was defined by the work he did, the people he helped, and the positive impact he created quietly, steadily, and consistently. His journey demonstrated that embracing humility and valuing contribution over recognition was not only possible but immensely rewarding. It showed that the art of silent success was perhaps the most powerful form of achievement, one that could sustain fulfillment, inspire others, and leave a lasting legacy. Alex smiled quietly to himself, knowing that he had discovered the ultimate lesson: success is not about being noticed, it is about making a difference. The applause may fade, the accolades may come and go, but the impact of consistent, humble, and meaningful effort endures forever.